Good day. As the crisis in Europe over gas supplies deepens, there has been a grudging acceptance increasingly amongst some European leaders that more emergency gas will have to be bought from Russia. There's even been some suggestions, apparently, that Nord Stream 2, the license to operate Nord Stream 2, will have to be fast-tracked, and that we could eventually see gas flowing via Nord Stream 2 within a few weeks, sooner than some people anticipated. However, it's clear to me that geopolitics remains the overall overriding priority and concern of the European leadership. And I say that in respect on reflecting from an article which has appeared in the Daily Telegraph, which reads, EU countries could buy emergency Russian gas as a block to drive down price, and which goes on to say that the EU Commission is proposing that henceforth emergency gas supplies should be bought from Russia by the European Union, acting as a bloc, rather than the individual countries that make up the European Union buying gas from Russia. And it reads as follows. I'm going to read parts of this article, which I should say are behind a paywall. The European Union could buy emergency gas reserves from Russia as a bloc under plans being considered by Brussels to protect people from record-breaking energy prices. EU sources said the idea was among several being looked at. The common purchase of gas reserves would be similar to the bloc's joint procurement strategy for buying medications to deal with the pandemic. The European Commission negotiated for medications on behalf of EU member states, which were thought to get a better price by negotiating as a bloc of 450 million consumers than they would individually. Josep Borrell, the EU's chief diplomat, said yesterday that Spain was among the member states pushing for joint procurement and common storage. France, Romania, Greece and the Czech Republic also supported the plans, which are at a very early stage. We continue to have a need for Russian gas, and we will probably need more than that contracted. That is why Spain proposes, quite rightly, that the negotiation be done not country by country, but as a whole, as has been done with medications, Josep Borrell told the El País newspaper. We are facing an emergency situation, and the gas supply problem has a geopolitical dimension, Borrell added in a veiled reference to strained relations with Russia. So that's the plan. The idea is that the European Union will presumably send a delegation to Moscow to negotiate with the Russians. It's not clear whether they want to negotiate with Gazprom or directly with Vladimir Putin himself, though Putin is not a member of Gazprom's board. He has participated in gas negotiations in the past. For example, in 2009, he negotiated an extremely controversial deal with Ukrainian Prime Minister Yulia Tymoshenko, which set the price of gas, Russian gas, exported by Gazprom to Ukraine at a much higher level, by the way, than many Ukrainian officials, including the then Ukrainian President Yushchenko, thought was advisable. Anyway, Putin has a history, therefore, of participating in gas negotiations, and conceivably that might happen again. Having said this, I'm going to make a few observations about this idea, which the first is that, contrary to what Mr. Borrell is saying and what the Daily Telegraph is saying, this is not, in my opinion, intended to help European consumers. Rather, it is intended to prevent something entirely different. And what we are looking at and talking about in this context is the recent decision by the Hungarian government to agree a gas supply contract directly with Gazprom, bypassing Ukraine and having the gas pass to Hungary via Austria through the Turk Stream pipeline, which the Russians have built in parallel with the Nord Stream pipeline, and which ships gas to Turkey, to Istanbul to be precise, from where it is then sent on to Central Europe through various pipeline spurs, which have been built to a central hub in Austria, from where it is circulated to various Central and South European countries. And this is what I think Borrell and the European leadership want to prevent. They have been alarmed by the fact that I think the Hungarians took this decision by themselves to cut this deal with the Russians without consulting or debating or discussing matters with the European leadership first. And they also see that Serbia, which admittedly is not an EU country, has in effect done the same thing. And they are becoming increasingly concerned that other EU states might start doing that also. At which point it's conceivable that two policies that the EU is deeply committed to, one being the third energy package, which I discussed in my previous programs, and the second being the support for Ukraine, that policy could disintegrate. Let's deal with the question of Ukraine first. The first point to make about the Hungarian deal is that, of course, it completely bypasses Ukraine's pipeline network. And, of course, it is very much the EU's position that it wants to preserve the position of Ukraine as a gas transit state. The Europeans are probably alarmed if they are aware or have read properly the Kremlin's readout of the meeting that Putin had the other day near Moscow, in which he discussed various energy-related issues, and in which he indirectly confirmed that Gazprom has no wish or desire to extend gas transit contracts with Ukraine beyond their current expiry date, which is 2024. So if more and more European states rush off and start doing deals directly with Gazprom to have gas supplied to them via Turk Stream and potentially Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2, bypassing Ukraine, then the EU's commitment to Ukraine that it will remain a gas transit state will become a dead letter and will be unenforceable. The second problem is that, of course, if Hungary starts to make these kind of deals directly with the Russians, and if other countries in the EU also start to make deals directly with the Russians, then that could ultimately undermine the EU's third energy package. The EU's third energy package, which was announced some years ago, and which the EU has been pushing relentlessly to get the Russians to agree to, despite the fact that the Russians equally relentlessly say no, is a deal whereby pipeline networks and gas fields have to be opened up to competition. And the idea is that if you sell gas to Europe, then your pipelines, any pipelines you build, must be operated by more than one operator, and the gas fields from where the gas originates must be open to more than one operator also. And of course, when we talk about more than one operator in a Russian context, what we really mean is that the EU wants to see European operators operating along the Russian pipeline networks. So the EU Commission wants to have Gazprom operate its pipelines alongside European companies, and it wants European companies operating, as it said, upstream all the way inside Russia itself, operating those pipelines when they are inside Russia. And it also wants European companies operating in Russian gas fields, extracting gas from those fields. In effect, turning Russia, as I've said previously, into Nigeria with snow. This is something that the Russians have adamantly refused to agree to. The Europeans continue to try and press the Russians in that direction. As I've said, it is this quarrel, this issue, has been at the root of much of the tension between the EU and Russia that has flared up repeatedly and increasingly since the early 2000s. And the worry that the European leadership has is that if countries, EU countries, start to cut independent deals with the Russians and with Gazprom to get Russian gas supplied to them on an emergency basis through the winter, they will start to bypass the third energy package. They will begin to cut deals and make contracts with the Russians that disregard the third energy package, and which would in effect make that third energy package a dead letter. Now, I should say that there is an instructive example of what happened with the third energy package previously. Some years ago, back in 2014, the EU essentially insisted that a pipeline that the Russians were building under the Black Sea, and which was going to head to Bulgaria, South Stream, and which was going to go from Bulgaria via Greece and other Balkan countries, should be subject to the third energy package. And Bulgaria disastrously agreed to that. And then, to the horror of the Bulgarians and to the horror of some of the other Baltic states that were participating in South Stream, the Russians responded by simply cancelling South Stream. The Russians said that if South Stream were made subject to the third energy package in that way, the Russians would simply abandon it, something that the Europeans never imagined that the Russians would ever do. So the result of that was, and the consequence of that was, that the Russians, instead of proceeding to build South Stream to southern Europe, to Bulgaria and Greece and all the rest, built the pipeline South Stream instead to Turkey and renamed it Turk Stream. Turkey, of course, is not an EU state and therefore is not subject to the third energy package. So the result was that Bulgaria, in effect, shot itself in the foot by agreeing to the EU demand that Russian pipelines built to Bulgaria, be subject to the third energy package, as did the other Balkan states. And the fear that the EU leadership now has is that if such a thing were to happen again, if Balkan states, for example, were to start cutting deals directly with the Russians, as Serbia has and Hungary have done, then learning the lesson from what happened with Bulgaria and with South Stream, they might on this occasion agree to the Russian demand that any pipelines and any Russian pipeline gas piped directly to these countries also is no longer subject to the third energy package. And that is something, again, that the Europeans do not want to see. So that is why, in my opinion, the EU and Borrell are now suggesting, and before long I predict they will be insisting, that they take over the negotiations for the emergency gas supplies from the EU states, and that they negotiate directly with Gazprom and with Putin on behalf of all EU member states in order to make sure that EU member states don't go their own way. They don't decide to make deals with the Russians that will undermine EU policies with respect either to Ukraine or with respect to the third energy package. Now, the Russians, I suspect, will not be particularly keen on negotiating directly with the EU. They would always prefer to deal with countries as separate states. But ultimately, I suspect that this is not in Russia's hands. If states by themselves decide that they are prepared to give up their sovereignty again to the EU and surrender negotiation rights on emergency gas purchases from Russia to the EU Commission, as they did with the medications issue during the pandemic, well, I don't really see what the Russians can do about that. They will have to go along with it. But I do wonder and ask myself why EU member states would want to go down this strange road. On the face of it, it doesn't seem to me like a good idea at all. I would have thought that EU member states, for precisely the reasons that concern people like Borrell and the EU Commission, would prefer to deal directly with the Russians rather than go through Brussels and the EU Commission, which, as Borrell has helpfully reminded us, has geopolitical concerns when it comes to negotiating with Russia, as opposed to simply and straightforwardly commercial concerns. So I expect that some EU states, perhaps Germany first and foremost, though that's difficult to say for certain, given the fact that we don't know what the next German government is going to look like or what policies it's going to follow. But one would have expected that some EU states, Hungary obviously, Germany possibly, perhaps other EU states, will oppose or withstand or resist this demand from the EU Commission, which I am sure we're going to see and hear a great deal more of, certainly over the course of the next few weeks and certainly over the course of the current crisis, but possibly also over the next few months and years, irrespective of what happens with respect to this crisis now. And that, of course, begs the other big question, because, of course, one of the reasons, as I've discussed in the recent program which I did about the energy crisis in Europe, one of the reasons why we are in this crisis is precisely because the EU leadership has been bringing to bear an ideological perspective to this issue. It has insisted on pursuing policies towards Russia that have jeopardized the entire relationship with Russia at precisely the time when the EU, because of this complicated transition, as it's called, that it is undertaking, as it is trying to move away from fossil fuels towards essentially windmill power, renewables, because of this policy, it is having to rely increasingly on natural gas. And as I've also pointed out, given that the EU and European states, in addition, insist that they don't want nuclear power, it's highly likely that this dependence on natural gas, which, by the way, means dependence on Russia for natural gas, is going to continue for a very long time. But it seems that the priority, the overriding concern, is not to deal with that problem, not to sort out and agree stable gas supply contracts between Russia and European countries, and to take real steps that would secure the interests of European consumers. It is to protect the EU's overall position and its policies. And Primarily, as I said, those policies are the third energy package and support for Ukraine. And also, and further, we also see how, faced by these kind of problems, the immediate instinct of the EU leadership, backed by countries like France and Spain, but also I suspect other countries too, is to try to centralise decision making, not to allow consumer interests and companies to make their own decisions and to cut their own deals with Gazprom, but to have those decisions taken at the highest possible level by the EU leadership instead. And again, I wonder why people are so willing to agree to that, but the reality is always that they are. So where is all this going? Well, we have a gas crisis at the moment in Europe. Gazprom has indicated that its reserves will be full sometime around mid-November, and at that point, more Russian gas should start to flow westward towards Europe. It's highly likely that will take off some of the edge of the crisis that Europe is facing this winter. But I suspect that if we get into a situation where the EU starts to take over conduct of the negotiations, then it's highly likely also that those negotiations will become much more difficult, far more complicated, far more protracted than they already are. And then there is a real risk and a real danger in that case of a total breakdown in the negotiations. And of course, the other thing to say is that, of course, the EU is talking at the moment about negotiating with Russia for emergency gas supplies. But when it talks about emergency gas supplies, I suspect that before very long, they will be insisting, if they're granted the right to negotiate emergency gas supplies, they will be insisting that they should conduct all negotiations for all gas supplies from the Russians in future, which will mean that the EU Commission takes over and has the overall priority on this issue. Well, we shall see whether that happens, but if that does happen, then I predict that we will have not just more problems in negotiations, but fewer and fewer Russian gas deliveries to Europe. Because at that point, I suspect that the Russians will say to themselves that, frankly, selling gas to Europe is an absolute fool's game. The Europeans refuse to accept commercial pricing. They refuse to agree long-term contracts. They always introduced ideological and political objectives to what they to all gas negotiations. Why should we continue and persist with this? We will continue to supply gas via Turk Stream, via Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2, but ultimately we don't need to sell gas to the Europeans as we once did. We have already built one gas pipeline to China. That's the Power of Siberia pipeline. We're going to build a second gas pipeline to China, the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline, which will take gas from gas fields which up to now have been primarily supplying Europe. And perhaps most importantly, we now have an active and very well developed liquefied natural gas industry in the Arctic, and we are busy opening up the Arctic and developing the northern sea route in the Arctic. So there is absolutely nothing to prevent us building not just these pipelines to China, but building liquefied natural gas stations and tankers, and sending those tankers along the Northern Sea route to Asia, to the Asian Pacific region, and supplying liquefied natural gas to the countries of the Asia-Pacific region. Of course, that will mean China to a great degree, but it could also mean the two Koreas, primarily, of course, in this case, South Korea. It could mean Japan. It could mean all sorts of countries who are probably very anxious to buy from us all this gas. And if we do that, well, at that point, we don't need to supply the Europeans anymore. We can gradually scale down our European business. It's been profitable to us in the past, but it comes with so much ideological and political baggage that we don't really want to continue with it anymore. The Europeans constantly complain about how dependent they are upon us for their gas. So why don't we help them by actually reducing the amount of gas we sell them, in which case they're welcome to find gas elsewhere. And I suspect that that is what the Russians will do. Only, of course, the problem is for the Europeans that whilst the Russians do have the option of sending their gas to other customers, they're developing their gas pipeline network in such a way that it is actually going to be relatively easy in a few years to transfer gas in various directions along the Russian pipeline network, so that instead of sending gas west, they can send the same gas east, depending on market conditions, and send it to China, and perhaps via China to other countries. Vietnam is a possibility. And perhaps also the Russians can also say, well, we've got this liquefied natural gas industry. They can also do that too. The point is that the Russians now have an increasingly diversified customer base for their gas. The same is not true from the other side, from the side of the Europeans. The Europeans have been constantly looking for ways to, as they put it, diversify their gas imports. There was a big plan way back in the early 2000s to build a pipeline to the Caucasus, gas pipeline to the Caucasus. It was going to be called Nabucco, and it was going to supply gas pump gas from Azerbaijan, and ultimately, though this was never admitted, from Iran, and that would somehow bypass the Russians and would mean that Europe would end its dependence on Russian gas. Except, of course, that Nabucco was never built because it never made any kind of economic sense. There was never enough gas from Azerbaijan to fill it. And Iran, of course, remains under sanctions. And anyway, is now busy mending its fences with the Chinese and the Russians. So that pipeline project was a dismal failure. And then there were other ideas. There was an idea about getting gas from the Gulf. Qatar, after all, is a major gas producer, and there's vast amount of gas in the Gulf, and there were plans to build pipelines from the Gulf, and there were even plans to get pipelines built via Syria, and many people believe that this was, by the way, the origins of the Syrian war. Well, the Syrian war has come and gone. The pipelines have never been built. The Gulf states have developed instead a very advanced and powerful liquefied natural gas industry. And surprise to surprise, their gas isn't going to Europe, it's going to Asia as well, where the demand for gas looks insatiable. So realistically, the Europeans are not going to get much gas from the Gulf either. Then, of course, they do get quite a lot of gas from North Africa, from Algeria, Libya, those sort of places. But, of course, Libya, that has been a disaster. The war there means that it's not realistically possible to expect much natural gas from Libya. But Algeria does supply quite a lot of gas, but nowhere near enough to make up the difference that any fall off in Russian supplies might cause. And there were other options or possibilities. There's Norway, but Norway's gas fields are depleting. And then there was the great big Göttingen gas field in northwest Europe. but that is also depleted. In fact, it is so depleted that it has caused earthquakes, because there's the gas there. The gas has been so depleted that it's causing earth tremors and cave-ins and that sort of thing, and as a result it's had to be closed. So that doesn't leave the Europeans with a great many options. Nonetheless, it seems to me that that is the route that they're going to go. Possibly they will hope that this mirage of liquefied natural gas from the United States that we were hearing so much about just a few years ago, that will resurface. I think that is a mirage. I think we've seen increasingly that the idea of liquefied natural gas being supplied by the United States in anything like the quantity needed to replace Russian supplies, I think we've seen over the last few years that that is simply not going to happen, and that it is not commercially viable. But perhaps, just possibly, that is what the Europeans are going to try and do. Well, we shall see. But the fact that the Europeans are now talking about negotiating with the Russians as a bloc confirms to me that it is political and ideological considerations which ultimately still, for European governments and for the European leaderships, still trumps ultimately any question of energy security and energy reliability. I predict, in fact I am sure, that these demands for the European Union to negotiate with the Russians as a bloc will grow and increase and will intensify. And I anticipate also that the Russian reaction to that will be exactly as I have said. In which case, given that nuclear power apparently remains unacceptable and windmill power has all its many problems, I predict that we are facing a cold future in Europe. Well, thank you very much for joining me for this program today. I look forward to you joining me in more programs in the future, both on this channel and on our main channel, the Duran, where I do programs with my colleague and friend Alex Christoforou. Please also remember to check out his channel, and please also remember to check us out on Locals, where we have a thriving community which you can join, and where you can hear the exclusive content that we are increasingly publishing on Locals as well. Also, you can find us on other platforms like BitChute, Library, Rumble, and increasingly, and most importantly perhaps, the new free speech platform SuperU. If you want to support us, you can also support us via Patreon and Subscribestar, and also of course you can go to our shop, buy the amazing things that you will find there, our hats, our hoodies, our sweatshirts, our t-shirts, and our long-sleeved t-shirts, and all those amazing things. Lastly, if you like this video, please tick the like button, and please also accept my apologies for perhaps the rather, shall we say, suboptimal conditions in which this video has had to be made. I'm afraid I've been obliged to travel outside London, and the facilities that I'm using are perhaps less than ideal. But I hope and nonetheless believe that this has been a worthwhile exercise making this video, and that you've been able to learn something from it. If so, then despite the suboptimal conditions, please remember to tick the like button, and please also check your subscription to this channel. Thank you for joining me again today. I look forward to you joining me again soon, and have a wonderful day. Until then.